Hi guys and welcome back to the Park End podcast. It is episode 8 and I know what you all may be thinking. You may be sitting there thinking, what is the Park End podcast, Cam? This is the Mighty Blues. It's always been called the Mighty Blues. I've always known it as the Mighty Blues. What's going on? What is the Park End podcast? Well, if you have been a fan of the channel or a member of this community for a number of years, you will remember back during COVID times, I created a podcast called the Park End Podcast. It was to go alongside the Mighty Blues YouTube channel, and we were producing, round about one podcast a week, maybe 2 or 3 podcasts a month, where we'd sit down. We'd have a guest on and we'd talk for an hour and a half about Everton, about the current situation at Everton, about the history of the football club, etc, etc. And we'd talk to various different people that had connections with Everton Football Club, from my dad being the first guest on the podcast, of course, getting into how I became an Evertonian, how he became an Evertonian. We had Kevin Campbell on the podcast. We had various different Everton sort of YouTube content creators that were talking about their journey into Everton Football Club. And then, because this was all sort of when football was not really happening during COVID. If you remember those times during the pandemic when football was cancelled and we didn't really have nothing to talk about and nothing really to do, that was when I decided to do the podcast and to talk to some people about, Everton Football Club and what it meant to them, whilst obviously we were all unsure about when it would come back. Then the football came back, and because of the tight schedule and because everything was, had been postponed and had been moved back, we ended up playing about 4 games a week, and there was never really any time to do a podcast episode because we were always sort of bogged down with match day stuff. And then obviously we had Carlo Ancelotti leave the football club and Rafa Benitez come in, and I'm sure you all know, and I don't need to tell you all, that since then it has been an incredibly difficult and challenging time to be an Evertonian over the last couple of years or so. We started this podcast with Carlo Ancelotti as manager, just coming towards the end of that season, his first season in charge, and then obviously Carlo left. We obviously brought in Rafael Benitez, and everything went to shit, really, didn't it? So we just left the podcast. We didn't finish it or say we weren't going to do it again. We just left it for the moment until things started to come back down, and then it sort of just become forgotten, to be honest with you. I sort of looked at it every now and then and thought, oh yeah, I wouldn't mind doing another episode of the podcast, but it was always something that was in the back of my mind, but I never really got round to doing. And all of a sudden yesterday, when I was sitting in bed last night, I just had a little bit of a thought, and I was sitting there. It was about 12:30. I was trying to get to sleep. I couldn't get to sleep because my mind was active left, right, and centre. And I thought, you know what? I'm going to bring back the Park End podcast tomorrow. So don't worry. If you're a fan of the Mighty Blues isn't going anywhere. We're still going to have, 7, 8, 9, 10 videos a week. We're still going to be doing reviews, previews, all of that sort of stuff. But I am going to try and get at least one podcast episode out a week. The podcast will be going on the Mighty Blues, so if you're watching this visually, it will of course be on the Mighty Blues YouTube channel. The podcast doesn't have its own separate channel, but you can of course listen to the podcast on Spotify and Apple Podcasts and any other podcast platform that you like listening to your podcasts on. So yeah, no guest today. Usually we'd sit down for about an hour or so, as I said, with a guest, and we'd talk about whatever was going on at the time, and we'd talk a little bit about how they became an Evertonian and the reasons for that. No guest today, just because, as I said, it was a little bit late notice. I literally made the decision to do this video today, or this podcast today. So I thought we'd sit down and we'd have a little bit of a conversation about why I became an Evertonian. Obviously, we are still in an international break, so there's not an awful lot to talk about surrounding Everton Football Club. There's not an awful lot that is going on at the football club at the moment. We've got the Merseyside Derby on Saturday afternoon, and of course we'll be doing all of the sorts of previews and all of the build-up to that game as the week goes on, and we'll obviously have the game preview out on Friday, and I'm sure we'll do a couple of videos about the game leading up to it. But if I'm being perfectly honest with yous, I don't really want to talk about the Merseyside Derby just yet. It's Monday. I've just had a lovely weekend, and I'd at least like to give myself a couple of more days before I have to start entertaining that game of football. Having said that, we'll probably talk a little bit about it towards the end of this episode. But anyway, I digress. I thought we'd sit down and just talk about how I became an Evertonian. We'd never really touched on that topic on the podcast. I've touched on it minimally on the channel over the years, but never really in its own sort of video or in its own sort of dedicated moment. As I said, the first episode of this podcast, which is still up now, by the way, you can go and listen to it, you can go and watch it on YouTube, was with my dad, and we did talk briefly about how I became an Evertonian and why he was an Evertonian, etc., etc. But it was more about his journey and his experience as opposed to mine. So I thought, you know what, we'll sit down, we'll have a little bit of a conversation about how I became an Evertonian, my obsession with this football club, because, you know, I always think sometimes when I do an instant match reaction or when I do a player ratings or when one of my videos gets, you know, a decent amount of views, I always think, I wonder if there's some people that sit there and just think, what is this kid going on about? He hasn't got a clue about Everton. He's probably not even an Evertonian. He probably doesn't know the game. So I thought we'd sit down and not just me share my experience to be like, look at me, I'm a massive Evertonian, but I want you guys to share your experience as well. I want you to put in the comments if you're watching this on YouTube, if you're watching it on the various different podcast platforms, then firstly, please rate it 5 stars, because I believe that's something you can do on the podcast platforms and that would help massively. Secondly, if you can write a little comment or you can leave a little review or you can put a post on X or Twitter, if you still call it Twitter like me, then please do so. Let me know your experiences with Everton, why you became an Evertonian, how you became an Evertonian, and, you know, hopefully if you want to come on the podcast and talk about it, then we'll definitely have you on to talk about it as well. But yeah, for me, it was a very sort of, I suppose, typical upbringing to becoming a football fan. It wasn't anything out of the ordinary. Whenever you ask somebody, you know, who do you support, and they give you a team and you say, well, why? Often the answer is, well, because dad supported that team, or my mum supported that team, or my granddad supported that team. Mine is no different, very, very similarly. I'm an Evertonian. I was an Evertonian from the day I was born. I will be an Evertonian till the day that I die. All because of my dad. My dad's a massive Evertonian. He's been going the game for 40, 50 odd years. My brother is a massive Evertonian. My uncle's a massive Evertonian. My cousins are all Evertonians. All of me dad's friends that, you know, we go game with are all Evertonians. So there was never really an option. I'd be lying if I was to say I didn't have Liverpool fans in the family. My mum is a very distant fan, and by that what I mean is she's a fan because my granddad's a Liverpool fan, but my granddad absolutely despises football. He's got no interest in football. He's got no interest in Liverpool. He's got no interest in anything. You know, if football was the only thing on the television, he'd sit there and look at the wall for an hour and a half. That's how uninterested he is in football. But he's a Liverpool fan because his dad was a Liverpool fan, and therefore my mum is a Liverpool fan. But my mum, very much like my granddad, you know, if football was the last thing on television, she'd just keep the television off and do something else. So, yeah, the Liverpool side of the family is absolutely nowhere near as strong as the Everton side, and therefore it was never really an option for me growing up. I had every single kit possible. I was a very fortunate child. I was very lucky. If it wasn't me mum and me dad, it was me brother. You know, every single time a kit was released, whether it be a home kit, an away kit, a third kit, a goalkeeper kit, a second goalkeeper kit, I pretty much had every single one of them, shorts, socks, the lot, and you know, like any typical sort of 6, 7, 8, 9 year old, every single day, you know, I wasn't in school, I was wearing an Everton kit, whether it be the home one, whether it be the goalie ones. I remember Nigel Martin in the early 2000s had a really, really nice sort of grey or black sort of goalie kit with orange detail on, and I absolutely loved it. It was one of my favourite kits. I still remember having it to this day. He also had a grey one a couple of years later with an orange detail on as well, which was absolutely fun. And I remember Tim Howard light blue goalkeeper kit that he wore in the 2009 semi-final of the FA Cup. We also had a light green one at that time as well. I had both of those kits. I was absolutely obsessed with kits, and through that, you know, getting all of the kits and you know, it was never really a, do you want to be an Everton fan or do you want to be a Liverpool fan, or who do you want to support? It was, for me, it was just, I'm an Evertonian. It's not a case of, you know, well, I can pick who I want to support here, and nowadays I think there's a lot more sort of emphasis on young kids picking their own football team, being able to make their own decisions, etc., etc. And obviously, there's a lot more media out there now with social media and Twitter and Instagram and YouTube, all of the TikTok and all of those sorts of places where kids are a lot more knowledgeable about the wider world of football now. For example, you will have young kids, 7, 8, 9, 10, who know how many goals Jude Bellingham has scored for Real Madrid in his opening few games. I would never have known that when I was a kid because we didn't have social media to find that stuff out. I would have never have known, how many goals someone had scored for Real Madrid unless I'd sat and watched it, and why would I do that at such a young age? So, as I said, it was a little bit different back in the day in terms of who you supported and why. Still, I think it's still very much a case of whoever your father supports, but I think there's more options now. Whereas back in the day, like I said, it wasn't a question. It wasn't a discussion point. It wasn't a thought. It wasn't anything. It was just, you are an Evertonian. You don't have to like football if you don't like it, if you don't want to watch it, if you don't want to, be involved in it, that's fine. But if you do want to be involved in it, you are an Evertonian. And I feel like that was probably the case for, the majority of people that are watching or listening to the podcast. I still remember my first ever game. It was the 27th of October, which is my birthday, 2004. I was 6 years old on the day. We played Preston North End at Goodison Park in the League Cup, round 3 of the League Cup. I've got all of the stats up here. Andre Mariner was the referee, no surprise there. We actually won the game 2-0. Lee Carsley scored just before the hour mark, and Marcus Bent. Darren Bent, what am I talking about? Marcus Bent scored just before the end of the game, 88th minute. Funnily enough, funny story about this. I've told this story before in passing on the channel, but never really individually. I didn't see either of the goals. The reason for that was because I left the game early because it was too much for me. As I said, it was my 6th birthday, 2004. I've got the pictures downstairs. I could probably get them up and insert them, but I'm not going to because there's some very strange people on the internet. I was there. I remember it was, as I said, late October, so it was cold. It was wintry time. My mum would wrap me up in 453 different layers of clothing. I had a vest on. I had an under t-shirt. I had a t-shirt. I had a hoodie. I had a jumper. I had a jacket. I had a coat. I had about 400 different layers on. I was boiling. I always remember being absolutely boiling in the house before I left. I had my Power Rangers hat on, same on the pants, about 4 different layers of clothing on the pants. I made my way down to Goodison Park. The attendance was 33,000 according to this page I've got up here. It was booming. I think the game actually ended up kicking off late because there was problems with fans trying to get into the stadiums through the turnstiles, so they had to delay the game by 10 minutes. But all of that was happening before my own eyes and in my first sort of footballing experience. I'd watched clips of Everton on the television when my dad had been watching them, but I'd never quite understood what this meant and what this felt like and why this meant so much to so many people, because I was just a kid and I didn't know any better. And I'll always remember walking down to Goodison Park on that night, walking up Goodison Road and just thinking, wow, this is mega. This is like, it's almost Colosseum-like. And obviously, I'm not claiming to have known an awful lot about Rome and the Colosseums when I was 6 years old, but I can imagine, that was very much a similar feeling to what those people would have had all the way back then when you just looking up, oh, this is absolutely thousands of people coming to this one place, all for the same reason and all with the same aims. And yeah, like I said, I got into the ground. We were sitting in the main stand, right at the top of the main stand, so probably not the best place to sit in your first game as a 6-year-old. And the noise was just too much for me. I remember the game kicked off, and as I said, good back then was a much livelier place than what it is now. When we done the if any of you have seen the unpopular opinion video we did on Friday, where we spoke about people's unpopular Everton opinion, one of the opinions, the atmosphere at Goodison significantly changed and gotten worse over the years, and it's very difficult to argue against that when you can go into Goodison now as a 4 or 5 year old and you could probably sleep through a game dependent on how poorly Everton perform, whereas back then, as a 6-year-old going into the main stand, it was noisy. People were screaming, people were shouting, people were singing, people were swearing, all sorts of different levels of noise that I'd never experienced before as a 6-year-old, and I'd never had to deal with, and it all was just far too overstimulating, far too overwhelming, and I just didn't know how to deal with it. It was that football atmosphere of you will all know what I'm talking about if anybody has been to a football game. Football atmospheres, and Goodison Park was especially like this under the in the David Moyes times, and I loved this later on in my life when I'd gotten used to it and when I'd started to like it a bit more. But football atmospheres are very sort of intimidating. They're very loud. They're very angry. It's not necessarily angry chants or angry words or angry emotions, but it comes across that way because of the tribalism within football. And yeah, I had to leave. I had to leave the ground early. I remember walking home with my dad. Didn't see any of the goals. It was 0-0. I left at half time. My dad basically said, "Well, we'll give it to half time and we'll see how you feel." And I just remember being in tears for the majority of the first half and just saying to him at half time, "I don't really want to be here. It's too much. It's a bit too loud. I just want to go home." And we went home, as I said, Lee Carsley and Marcus Benz scoring on that evening. We ended up winning 2-0 and progressed into the next round. Tim Cahill was rested. Nigel Martin was rested. These are all players that ultimately went on to be heroes to me in the future. And I had to leave my first experience watching these players because obviously it was for me. Duncan Ferguson was playing, James McFadden, Joseph Yobo. Again, like I said, players that throughout the years I grew to absolutely love and absolutely adore. And if you'd have said to me, at half time of that game, you're going to watch Tim Cahill and James McFadden and Duncan Ferguson many, many more times as an Evertonian over the years, I'd have said, I'll watch them many times live because I'm not big into this. I probably wouldn't have said it like that because I wouldn't been able to formulate a sentence like that as a 6-year-old. But I think that even after that experience, I still was pulled back in. Is a little bit baffling. And do you know what? I was never forced. I was never forced by my dad. I was never forced by my brother. I was never forced by anyone. It wasn't a case of, well, you're staying because you're an Evertonian and you are going to be forced to love Everton. It wasn't a case of, we left that game at half time and then we were back there the following Saturday to watch, to watch us play in the league. That was a Wednesday, by the way. It wasn't a case of that. It was never a case of that. I don't think I went to another game then for a couple of months, but I was dragged in on that night. As I said, leaving at half time, walking home in tears because of all of the overwhelming amounts of emotion and just, it all being too much. I'd have never have thought that there would have been an outlasting effect that would have had on my life. If there would have been any effect, I would have thought it would be the effect of, I don't want to go back there, I don't like that, that's not for me. But it wasn't, it was the opposite. It was almost like I need to go back there. I want to go back there. I want that again. I want to sit through 90 minutes of that. I can sit through 90 minutes of that. And, fast forward, what are we now? That was 2004. So 20 years later, 19 years later, and I've been a season ticket holder for 15 years. I've been to many a different country around Europe watching Everton. I've been to the United States of America to watch Everton. When you go into Goodison Park now and you hear screaming and shouting and chanting and emotion, more often than not, it's me. And I was the kid who was afraid of that. I was the kid who had to leave the stadium early. And I always am cautious of, kids and the area because I understand what it's like to be, a bit overly stimulated, as I said. But I was the kid that didn't like any of that and had to leave and was unsure of the environment. And now I absolutely revel in Goodison Park being like a bear pit, and Park being, loud and angry and a real intimidating place for the opposition to go. And, like I said, in those David Moyes days, as I got older, that was me 6th birthday. As I got to 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, it was all just, it become a love. It become, in some ways, an addiction, which probably isn't a good thing. Well, it definitely isn't a good thing. Never be good. Never good to be addicted to anything, but it did. It become a case of, I cannot wait for every Saturday. I cannot wait to get up and to go to the pub before the game and to go to the game with my dad and to scream and shout and watch Everton fight for the, every ball. Watch Tim Cahill, a fella that, I'd watched on the bench and had to leave because I was terrified of the situation. I'm now screaming and shouting, watching him every week. James McFadden, as I said, players like that. The more we Fellaini, Mikel Arteta, Bill Jagielka, obviously, and Tim Howard, Nigel Martin, even before that. Nigel Martin was one of my heroes growing up. One of my heroes, and as I said, he wasn't playing on that night. I think he'd been rested, but he was a part of that squad. He was at the football club at that time, and a couple of years later, I had his name on the back of every Everton kit, and I absolutely loved them. So yeah, quite a bizarre and I think unusual experience, to be honest with you. I always see a lot of young kids come in the match now, and there's a couple of young that sit by us every week, and they probably are around 6, 7, 8 years old, and they turn up and they sit there and they scream and they shout and they absolutely love it, and it does. It doesn't overstimulate them. It doesn't get too much. It's not too loud. They absolutely revel in it. There's a kid that sits next to us, and he absolutely loves it. He revels in it. When the crowd are chanting, he's up and he's chanting. When he scored a goal, he's up and he's hugging people, and he's absolutely loving it. And sometimes I look and I think, wow, if you're like that now at that age, how invested and how much is this going to affect you when you're my age, when you're 20 odd years down the line? Because when I was your age, I didn't think I'd be sat in this stadium again, and now you can't get me away from it. But yeah, as I said, that was the beginning of a very unexpected journey for me into becoming an Evertonian. And as I said, 20 years later, I've been a season ticket holder for 15 years. I've been all around the world watching Everton. I've dedicated a lot of my time to do a YouTube channel to talk about Everton for the last 5 years. That I've been doing the Mighty Blues for half a decade. So it's certainly come as a surprise when I think back and when I look back to that night, and I think it's memories of that night. It wasn't long after that, I think maybe a year after that night, I had my first season ticket. So within a year, I'd gone from leaving at half time because I didn't want to be there to not only liking being there and wanting to go, but committing to going every single week. I don't mean commit financially, because obviously my dad was paying for it, but committing me time to go every single week. That's how quickly I fell in love with this football club. And it's cringy, and it might be a cliche to say, but it's the truth. What ultimately, once Everton has touched you, nothing will be the same, and that can be thrown out an awful lot, and people can say, oh yeah, another cringy saying, another cringy quote, but it's true. It's absolutely true. And I think this story, my story, is quite proof of that. It wasn't the stereotypical, I walked up the stairs at good eyes, lit up brightly, and I didn't ever look back since. It wasn't that. My first experience was the opposite. My first experience was one that, most people would after that say, no, never going back there, not interested in that. Let's just go and find something else to enjoy. But I can't even, I can't even tell you the day or the moment or the situation in which I said, no, I'm going to give this another go. I want to go again. I'm going to enjoy it. I want to be an Evertonian. I just remember that moment of leaving at half time because I didn't enjoy it, and then a couple of years later being a season ticket holder. I don't remember how I come to wanting to go back or feeling like I needed to go back, but as I said, I suppose that's the magic of it, is not always an explanation. Sometimes you're just born to be something, and I was born to be an Evertonian, and I was born to dedicate my life to loving this football club, as we all were, by the way, not just me, as I'm sure every single one of us were. So yeah, that was my first experience at Goodison Park. Not a great one. We won the game, I suppose, which is a rarity at Goodison days, so maybe I should be a little bit more grateful. But yeah, definitely an interesting one. As I said, I had an obsession with all of the kits growing up as a kid. I had to have every kit. I remember getting, one of the early kits when I was young, probably only 3, 4 years old. It was before I'd gone to my first game. I think I on the back of it. I think it was one of the kits. And I remember my brother had bought it. My brother at the time had a paper round. He was in school. He had a paper round, and he'd saved up all his money from the paper round to buy me this kit. And within 15 minutes, I think I spilled sausage and beans all over it, and it was stained. And he had to go back and try and replace it. He couldn't. Next week, he saved up all his money again, and he went and got me another one. Then the very next same kit, obviously same name and number on the back, but he replaced it because I'd ended up spilling stuff on me on myself. So you're probably listening to this thinking what a spoiled child he was, and to be fair, I was a spoiled child. I was a very, very lucky child growing up. But again, as I said, whether it be home, whether it be away, whether it be third, I've queued up outside of the Everton shop on Friday mornings to be able to be one of the first to get the kits. This is before, by the way, social media revealed them early. This is before you got leaked images 3 days before. This was before you could order it and then it come on the day. Or this was when you got you turned up at the shop and you didn't know what it looked like until you're in the queue waiting to buy it. So yeah, as I said, some really, really good memories of the early days supporting Everton Football Club. I suppose I could go a little bit more in depth maybe on another video or another podcast if someone's firing questions at me so I can go off the spot. But yeah, some really, really warm memories of being at Goodison Park, watching Everton, shouting, screaming, and just overall falling in love with this passion that, I never thought I'd have, and then ultimately ended up having completely against my own thought. Really, I didn't think I'd ever be in that position, and obviously the family elements of it. I've been going to the park for 20 odd years now, nearly 20 years next year, and every single game I've sat next to my dad. There must have been about 10 games in that time for whatever reason, whether he's been on holiday or whether he's not been able to make it. There's maybe 10 games is where I've not sat next to me dad. Every other game I've sat next to me dad and still do to this day. And, that's a really heartwarming and lovely thing as well that I feel like a lot of people share is it's not just going the match, it's going the match with your brother or your dad or your mum or your sister or your partner. And, doing that, having that shared passion and having that shared enjoyment for years. Travelling to watch Everton is a little bit of a mad situation. I've been to lucky enough to have been to a couple of countries to watch Everton Football Club. I watched us away at Lille in the Europa League in 2014. That famous night that we took 423 million fans to Lille. I remember watching us in Croatia when we played Hajduk Split in a qualifying game. That was an interesting evening, certainly an interesting evening. And I remember obviously going to the United States to watch us as well. The interesting things about the Lille and the Croatia games, the split games, where obviously I went to both of those games as a child, I think I was 18 when I went to Croatia, but I was only 14, 15 when we went to Lille, and I went with my dad. Now, whenever we went away to watch Everton, or whenever my dad went away, I obviously only went a couple of times, but my dad went away loads when, in the 08, 07, 06 times, when Everton were in Europe, and the UEFA Cup, it was called at that time, and he'd gone to Fiorentina, he'd gone to Nuremberg, he'd gone to the Netherlands, he said Alkmaar, he'd gone everywhere to watch Everton, basically, all over the world, watch Everton play. Every time my dad went away to watch Everton, he wouldn't approach it necessarily like a lot of people would approach it. So a lot of people would say, right, okay, Everton are playing in Florence on a Wednesday, so we will get a flight out on the Wednesday morning. We'll fly straight into Florence. We will go and watch the match. We'll maybe get a hotel room and we'll fly home the next day from Florence straight into Liverpool. Bosh. That wasn't really how my dad did it. That wasn't really how our group of sort of friends and family that used to go all abroad to watch Everton did it. And it was because it become far too expensive to do that. Ultimately these airports and these airlines would see that there was a certain football team from a certain part of the world playing another football team from another part of the world, and they would inflate the prices of direct flights from that one city to the other by a ridiculous amount. So we ended up in a position where I remember when we went to watch Everton against Lille in France, we were playing on the Thursday night, I believe. We were playing on the Thursday night. We all met up outside of my house on the Wednesday evening, about 10 o'clock. I think Liverpool had just played in the Champions League, just lost in the Champions League at home. And we all met up 10 o'clock in ours, outside of our house. We drove to Heathrow, so 4 or 5 hour drive to Heathrow. We got there about 3 o'clock in the morning, 4 o'clock in the morning. We slept in Heathrow Airport until 6 o'clock in the morning. We got a flight to Belgium, Brussels, and then we hired a car and we drove into Lille. And we were there by the Thursday morning. We'd had a combined 4 hours sleep maybe between us in the whole journey. And as soon as we got to Lille, we found our hotel, we put our bags in, and we were straight out on the town. And that was it. We were on the town. They obviously were on the ale. I was on the Coca-Cola. And we spent the day in the centre. We spent the day with loads of blues. As I said, it was that iconic trip where Everton took 33 million people to Lille. So it was definitely a packed out city centre full of Evertonians. And yeah, we just enjoyed ourselves. We had a laugh. Obviously, it got a little bit It got a little bit troublesome towards the end of it with the police being involved and stuff. I wasn't directly involved in that situation, but I was from a distance, so I could see what was going on. And yeah, we enjoyed ourselves. We ended up going to the ground about an hour or so before the game. Again, a lot of trouble getting in because of the police and stuff and that. But we watched Tony a bit do a couple of step overs, and we were in the home end. And maybe I shouldn't admit this, but another sort of quite important and interesting part of my dad's European away trips is that often we sit in the home ends of grounds because it's always nigh on impossible to get an away ticket, for an Everton game, certainly an Everton game in Europe. And therefore, my dad is a member of about 15 different European clubs membership schemes. So he is a Hajduk Split member and gets emails every single year, a Christmas email in Croatian from Hajduk Split wishing him a Merry Christmas. He's a Lille fan member and he gets emails from them in French every single year. I think he's a Fiorentina member. I think he's a Nuremberg member. He basically just signs up for memberships of whoever we're playing and then gets a home ticket, and we just turn up in all black, coat zipped up, and don't say a word. We did that in Lille. Thankfully, we weren't the only Evertonians there on that day, and there was a lot of Blues in the in home end. I mean, we weren't the only Evertonians in the home end on that day, and yeah, like I said, we saw we saw a couple of step overs from Tony Ibbott, and that was about it. It was a very boring game of football. I actually think Luca might have been playing for Lille on that day. I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure Luca Dean was playing for Lille that day. And yet, as I said, we watched the game. We left the ground and we ended up, a couple of the lads went out for a beer. I obviously was only young, so I went back with my dad, went to sleep next day, got up, drove to Belgium, spent a day in Belgium, and then got a flight back home and a flight back to London, and then drove all the way back to Liverpool from there. The Croatia trip, again, same, equally as mad. This time it was a drive to Manchester. It wasn't quite as hectic. It was a drive to Manchester. We flew into Dubrovnik. I think actually we flew into Switzerland. I think we had to get 2 flights. We flew into Switzerland, and then we flew from Switzerland into Dubrovnik. And then we had to get a 7-hour coach from Dubrovnik to Split, which was a lovely coach journey, to be fair. It was all along the coast and all along the coastal path of Croatia, and Croatia's a lovely, lovely country. If you haven't been, I highly recommend it. Maybe not for a football match, but I highly recommend it. And just as we were getting off the coach driver put his hand out to us and said, a little bit of a word of warning, I wouldn't open your mouth until you get out the stadium of a night. So we were like, sound, no problem, gets off. Checks into our little apartment, gets ready, again, coat zipped up, no colours on show, no accents, we're just walking past the home ends because we're in the home end, and, again, the Croatians like their football, they're very territorial about it, and put it this way, I wouldn't have liked to have been there if they'd have found out we were Evertonians. As I say, we get to the ground, we've got our tickets in Croatian, Hajduk Split versus Everton, we were in the home end, really, really good view of the pitch, by the way, right on the halfway line. We zipped our coats up, goes to go in. Remember, we all say to each other under our breath, right, listen, I think there was 5 of us, I think, or 4 of us. We all say, listen, being told, don't open your mouth, don't say anything, go in, don't cheer if we score, don't boo if they score, just there watching a game of footy. I get my ticket out, goes in, yep, sound, me dad, lads goes in. We're all sitting there and we're all thinking, where's our other mate? What's he doing? He was right behind us in the queue. And we just hear from behind us, what the do you mean me ticket's not working? There's me ticket there, it's clearly working. In the broadest, scousest accent I've ever heard in my life. And I just remember turning around and looking at me dad and thinking, we are getting filled in here. This is it. We are absolutely getting filled in here. And luckily enough, the police man managed to just get him in, and nobody else really heard it. We sat down. It was actually the game that a certain someone, Gylfi Sigurdsson, scored the goal from the halfway line. Jordan Pickford saved the penalty. I remember wanting to jump up at the halfway line, and I felt like I was on the Pepsi Max in Blackpool, because I went like that. The audio listeners won't be able to see this, but the visual listeners will. I went like that to jump up, just naturally, because Everton had just scored the goal from the halfway line. When have you ever seen Everton score a goal from the halfway line? And my dad just went like that, slammed his arm on my legs, and I sort of went and was just straight back down straight away. Like a ride, like when you lift up on a ride and then the barrier just sends you back down again. Again, luckily, nobody seen that. I think they started to get windy, Hajduk Split fans, towards the end of the game that we were Croatian Hajduk Split fans. So I think we left about 10 minutes in just to avoid any confrontation. And yeah, as I said, next day we drove back, got the coach back to Dubrovnik, spent a day there along the beach and stuff, lovely place. Back to Switzerland, spent a couple of hours there, and then back home. So yeah, it's never just to fly into the city, watch the game, come home. It's always a bit more eventful than that, and I'm grateful for that, because it's an experience, it's a trip. It's, you know, instead of just saying that Lille game was one of the most boring games of football I've ever watched in my life, but the day and the trip in itself was absolutely unbelievable. Same with the Hajduk Split game. It was a better game, but wasn't a particularly great performance by Everton. But the overall trip and everything that happened on it was absolutely fantastic, and I'll never forget it. So yeah, there's a couple of bits of sort of Everton. I walk down memory lane there for Everton. I've got loads more stories if you want to hear them. I didn't want to sit here for an hour and a half and just tell you why I'm a massive Evertonian and this is my Everton story, etc., etc. But I just thought, as a sort of way back into the podcast, as a sort of an entrance back into trying to do weekly episodes of this, I thought we'd sit down and we'd touch on this a little bit. So yeah, I suppose before we go, we'll talk about the upcoming game of football that Everton have got to play this weekend. As I said at the start of the podcast, it's not something I particularly want to talk about today, but we will. Merseyside Derby, of course, at Anfield. Massive congratulations to Everton women, by the way, who beat Liverpool women in the Merseyside Derby at Anfield yesterday, 1-0. Meg Finnegan with a really, really nice goal, nice header. So big congratulations to Everton women, and hopefully that is something that the men can replicate on Saturday. Obviously, this goes without saying, it's going to be an extremely difficult game of football. Liverpool are, a really, really strong side. Currently sat fourth in the Premier League table, 5 wins, 2 draws and 1 loss. Obviously, they've not been great over the last couple of games. Draw with Brighton, and obviously that controversial defeat to Tottenham. But before that, they were pretty faultless, and as much as I hate them and as much as I'm not in any way, sense or shape or form somebody that often credits Liverpool Football Club, I do think they're a team that will challenge this season. I do think they're a team that will, whoever becomes the Premier League champion, Liverpool will give them a problem this season, and that ultimately means that they will give Everton a problem on Saturday. And look, I think the one sort of positive going into this, and maybe the one bit of positivity we can have is, well, a couple of bits of positivity, really. One of them, obviously, is the fact that we won our last game of football, and we won it quite convincingly, and we won it with probably the best performance we've put in all season. I think we can take a lot of confidence from that. And secondly, the majority of our good our good performances this season have come away from home. The away performance against Brentford was absolutely fantastic. The away performance against Aston Villa was absolutely fantastic. Our last 2 away performances have been really, really strong. And look, obviously, Aston Villa, Brentford, and then Liverpool are in a completely different sort of stratosphere in terms of their their levels. But hopefully, Everton can sort of try and replicate, and Sean Dyche can try and replicate a similar performance, or certainly a similar level of confidence from those games, and try and go and get something from Anfield. As I said before, as we've established, I've been an Evertonian for 20 odd years, if not more, well, 25 years, but I've been going for 20 years. I have only ever seen Everton win once at Anfield, and it was in that COVID year. I was born in 99, but I obviously wasn't old enough to remember it. So we are due another one. And hopefully we can avoid losing it. But listen, it will be a really, really difficult game, and I hate Merseyside derbies. I really, really do. If you find one Evertonian that thinks we'll turn up and beat them on Saturday, then please direct them my way, because I'd love whatever they've got to give them that confidence. But look, it comes down twice a year. We have to play them twice a year, and ultimately we have to deal with that. And as I said, hopefully we can take a bit of confidence from that Bournemouth win. Hopefully we can take a bit of confidence from the fact that we've performed well away from home this season, and hopefully we can turn up and put a good fight in. As I said, losing to a really, really strong Liverpool team in a Merseyside derby at Anfield is something that Everton have done times in my lifetime. What I absolutely can't stand for is no effort or no determination or passion or no energy, or I can't stand for a bad performance. Again, I'm not going to say I don't mind the bad results, because it will kill me if we lose on Saturday, but I can accept and I can appreciate when a team is better than Everton, but what I can't accept and appreciate is a lack of effort or a lack of the fundamentals that should go into a derby performance. I can't accept that. So yeah, let's wait and see, and let's hope we can get a tune out of these players, or the manager can get. Anyway, we are going to leave it there. That is episode 8 of the Park End podcast. If you have enjoyed this and you want to see more of these, this might be the first time you've ever heard this because you might be a new subscriber, then please do let me know. This is the first episode in 2 years, so maybe I should call it season 2. I'm not going to, because I can't be arsed. Yeah, if you've enjoyed it, please do leave a like. As I said, if you watched it on YouTube, massive thank you. If you could leave a like and subscribe, that would be amazing. If you're listening on any of the other podcast platforms, Spotify, Apple Music, etc., then please give us a 5-star rating and leave your reviews and comments in the sections below. But yeah, we'll be back over the next couple of days on the Mighty Blues, and hopefully the podcast will be back next week. But a massive thank you all for watching. I really do appreciate it, or listening if you're listening. Yeah, hopefully you've enjoyed a little bit of a delve into why I'm an Evertonian and why I sit here and scream my head off every Saturday evening when Everton lose games of footy. Maybe you were watching the instant match reactions thinking, why does he even do this? Well, that's why. Big thank you all for watching, and we'll see you.